Hello, I'm here in my messy workroom and today I'm going to answer some questions. The first question is, what made you want to be a writer? Well, it happened by accident. When I was young, I used to love drawing and painting. That was one of my favourite things. And so when I had some children of my own, I thought it would be a good idea to see if I could make a picture book for them. And I thought I would love to do the pictures and maybe I could just write a little bit to turn it into a book, make a book work. And I've got one of my early picture books here to show you. Very homemade, they were very homemade, and this was one about my two boys who used to get up to all sorts of naughty things. And you can see that I didn't write very much. I mainly concentrated on doing pictures and I enjoyed that. And the children seemed to like me doing it and said, do another one, Mum, do another one. So I made some more little books. I did one about Christmas, one about holidays, one about my daughter getting some new roller skates and learning to roller skate. But as time passed by, something strange seemed to happen. The stories started to get longer so that I was writing more and more, and I couldn't be bothered with the pictures so much. And gradually I came to realise that actually what I really enjoyed doing most of all was making up stories and writing them down and trying to think what could I put at the beginning of the story to make them really interested? What could I put in the middle of a story to make it funny, scary, adventurous, magical? And how could I find something at the end of the story to give a happy ending, or at least a satisfactory ending? And so as time went by and I did longer and longer stories, I came to realise that what I really was enjoying doing was writing stories more than anything. And so I started to work at it and do it seriously and send stories away to publishers, and eventually some books started to get published. Now, the second question is, what gave you the idea for Meet Me by the Steel Man? Now, steelworks have been very important in my life, right from being very little, because I grew up in a house that was next door to the steelworks gate. Now, it wasn't in Sheffield then, we lived on the Cleveland coast near the sea in a very industrial village. Our house had the steelworks gate beside it, and down in the valley below us was an iron ore mine. And iron ore used to be brought out of the mine in buckets, and the buckets used to be carried up the hillside on an overhead cable system, so that when we looked out of the window we would see buckets of iron ore going past, right past our house, into the steelworks, round to the back of where our house was, and there they would be tipped. And each time a bucket of iron ore was tipped, there was a great clatterbang crash and a spray of dust too. So it was a very noisy, dusty place to live, but I actually found it quite an exciting place to live. Sometimes in the evenings they used to tip red hot slag in the distance, and the whole sky used to turn pink at night when they'd been tipping the red hot slag. Far away from the houses where it was safe. That again was a sort of strange, magical experience. So I'd always been used to steelworks, and then later on in life we came to live in Sheffield, so of course we were near steelworks again. And I had the idea that I would like to write a story for young children, fairly young children, but it would be good if it could put a bit of steelworks history in it. but I couldn't quite think how to do it at first. And then Meadowhall Shopping Centre had opened, and I used to go there to do my shopping. And one day I went, and I used to just walk past the statues of steel men that used to be right there in the middle of Meadowhall, right in the middle of all the shops. And I always loved those statues. I thought they were beautiful and so real. That day I went shopping, and as I walked past the statues, I just happened to notice there was a little boy standing by the statues, looking up at them, looking up at the men's faces. I didn't think anything of it. I just went off, did my shopping, went and had a cup of coffee, and when it was time to go home and I walked past the statues again, I saw that there was that little boy there again. He almost looked as though he'd been there all morning, and he was still staring up at the statues and their faces. And as I walked past, this idea flashed into my mind. I thought, he looks as though he thinks that those statues are going to turn round and talk to him. And then I thought, aha, what if they did? That would be a magical way to write a story about steel making history. What if those statues came to life? What would they say? What would they do? What would they want? And that ended up being Meet Me by the Steelmen. Now, the next question is also about Steelmen books. Why did you want to write a second story about steelmen? Well, what happened was that Meet Me by the Steelmen was made into a book, and I was really happy with that, and I knew that sometimes children would read the story and then they would go to Meadowhall to look for the statues. But at Meadowhall, they'd moved the statues. They'd put them outside, so people would go there looking for the statues in amongst the shops and think, oh, they're not where they're supposed to be. I've got some photographs to show you. This is a photograph that I took when Meadowhall was new, and you can see that the statues were there with shops all around them, right in the middle. They were near an escalator. This is where the statues are now, outside in the car park near to the taxi rank. So that gave me the feeling that it would be quite a nice idea to try to write a second story about the steelmen statues being moved outside. But that didn't seem to be quite enough of an idea by itself. And then my oldest son said to me, "But Mum, there's some new statues in Sheffield. What about them?" And I knew immediately what he meant, because I'd been to see those statues and I loved them. Beautiful statues of the women of steel. And I just thought, oh, he's right about that. What a good idea, yes. Wouldn't it be great to put the women of steel into a story as well? So the second book ended up being called Forged in Steel, and it's about both the statues, the steelmen and the women of steel. Now then, the next question is, what research did you do for both of the books? Well, when I lived in Sheffield, I lived quite near to the Abbeydale hamlet, and that was a brilliant place to go and do some research and find out all about steelmaking history. You could go there too. If you go on a day when the Abbeydale hamlet's open, they've got an old real crucible steel workshop there, and you can go right into it, and you can look up at the shelves and see all the crucible pots standing on shelves, all blackened and burned, and you can see all the equipment that the men had to use. And there's also the little workshop where the potter used to make the crucible pots. So that's a very interesting place, and there's lots of information there. So that was a big help to me when I needed to find out about crucible steel and how it was made. But there was another way that I found too. I went and joined a local history group, and one of the people in our local history group was an old man called Bernard Callan. And Bernard had made a special study of steelmaking history, especially in Sheffield. And so he was very kind and helpful to me. And whenever I got stuck, I used to go and ask Bernard, and he always had the answer for me. But there was another thing about Bernard that was very special. When he was younger, he had worked in the huge steelworks that used to stand where Meadowhall Shopping Centre is now. And so he was able to tell me about the big steelworks that used to be there. And so Bernard was a very helpful, kind person who gave me lots of information. So that's how I did research and learnt a lot about steelmaking history. Now the next question is, do you base characters on real people? Now, sometimes if I write a story about history and there's a real person, I do put them into my stories. Usually I don't put people into my stories who are modern day people, who are friends or people that I know. But actually, one of the characters in both my statue stories was based on a real person. I used to know an old lady called Hilda Cotterill, and Hilda used to write very good poems, and she had some books of her poems published too. Hilda was a very funny, interesting, lively person, and when I started to think that I needed an old lady, I thought in the story, I thought I'll call her Ethel, but really she will be based on Hilda. And the other thing about Hilda that was very helpful to me was that Hilda was married to a man called Jack, who died quite a long time ago. And Jack used to, he wasn't a steel worker, but he was a little mester who used to work in the cutlery trade, and he used to grind forks. That was his job. And that work was actually quite dangerous, very hard work, because they had to polish the forks on a grinding wheel, and sparks would fly up into the men's faces, and also dust would come up from the grinding wheel, which they would breathe into their lungs, and it could make them very poorly. So it was actually a very dangerous kind of work, very hard. And Hilda told me that the very important thing for those men was that they had to have a really good packed lunch to take to work with them, and they called it their snap, and everyone had a really good sized snap tin that they treasured and took good care of, and every day it had to be filled with really good food, things like homemade bread, oven bottom cakes, pork pies. And Hilda used to make really good snap for her husband Jack, and used to make dripping bread cakes, meat paste bread cakes, so that the men got lots of protein to help them do when they were doing such hard work. And so you see, listening to all of this from Hilda helped me understand quite a lot about how to make a proper snap tin, how to fill it, and how to make a proper Steelman's picnic. Now, there were some other people who were based just a little bit on real people in the second story, Forged in Steel. I've got some grandchildren. I've got 7 grandchildren, but the 3 youngest ones are Sean, Layla and Freya. And I wanted to put 3 children into the second story, and I thought, I was trying to think of names for them, and I thought, ooh, I wonder if they would mind if I used their names. So I asked them, and they said, oh yes, we want to be in your story, put our names in your story. So I did that, and although my grandchildren didn't really have the magical adventure that happened, I made all of that up. I think maybe I put a little bit of their 3 personalities into the story. So you see, just sometimes I do get an idea for people and put them into a story. Now, the very last question is an important one for me. It's, why do you put magic into stories? I love putting magic into stories, and it takes me right back to my own childhood. When I was young, at first I wasn't terribly good at reading, and I wasn't so interested in books initially, but one book that was given to me absolutely got me hooked, and it was called The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And there was a moment in that story that really gripped me, and it was when Lucy first climbed into the wardrobe. Now, what happened was that they were playing hide and seek, and Lucy wanted somewhere to hide, and so she thought she'd climb into this big old wardrobe, and she thought she'd hide at the back. Now, I'm not going to say what happened next, because I don't want to spoil it for you, but some magic started to happen. But it didn't happen in a big flash and bang and boom. It happened very slowly, a little bit at a time. First of all, she felt something that didn't feel quite right, and then she felt a sort of coldness that you wouldn't expect to find in a wardrobe, and little bit by little bit things changed until something completely extraordinary happened. And ever since then, I've always believed that the most powerful magic happens just a little bit at a time. Maybe you hear something that you think, that isn't quite right. Where am I hearing that? Where's that coming from? Maybe you smell something and you think, I shouldn't be smelling that round here. I shouldn't be smelling food in this place. Maybe you see something that you think, what is that doing there? And just a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and then suddenly you can realise very strange things are happening. I think that's the most interesting kind of magic, and I love trying to put that into my stories. So I've come to the end of my questions. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and I do hope you enjoy your reading just as much as I do now.